Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Professor Ming's Strategic Insights. I'm sure you must have noticed that diplomacy or the external behavior of the Communist China, either in languages or in actions, has been very assertive or even aggressive. You might think it's only targeting at Taiwan, but that's not the case. Look at what they've done in the South China Sea against the Philippines, or over the Diaoyutai Islands, or Senkaku Islands, as called by the Japanese, or the European countries, or even the United States. So Communist China's diplomacy has been labeled wolf warrior diplomacy. So what do we mean by wolf warrior diplomacy? Xi Jinping, the Secretary General of the Chinese Communist Party, has told his diplomats, "You want to promote a great power foreign policy with Chinese characteristics, with the aim of materialization of the great renaissance of the Chinese people. So you must dare to show your swords." That's the exact wording that he used. You must dare to show your swords. Ever since then, the Chinese foreign policy or its foreign behavior has been tougher and tougher. They've been using words like if once there's a quarrel or something happened between China and other countries, they always blame the other side, saying that it's all your fault. You must take all the responsibilities and things like that. And the words they've been using have been very ferocious or even threatening. Another example is that one of their foreign minister's spokesperson said in public, "The lessons of the 9/11 incidents aren't that far. The United States should not forget about its pain once the wounds are healed." It's threatening, right? very vivid. So that's why we said their foreign policy had been so assertive and aggressive. So why is it so? The question must be traced back to the year of 2012. The Communist China, or the Communist Party of China, convened their 18th Party's Congress. And that's the time when Xi Jinping rose to supremacy. He took the position of the Secretary General. After that, he proposed many new slogans. They sometimes call it the main themes or the main melodies in propaganda. Let me cite three examples. The first one is the Great Renaissance of the Chinese people. The second one goes like the East is ascending and the West is descending, or the East is rising and the West is declining. And the last one is China or the world is now facing a great challenge or a great change in world politics in 100 years. Primarily, these things are said in domestic or in internal propaganda for the purpose of social mobilization. These slogans may sound hollow to you. Therefore, some explanations are in order. The first one is about the so-called the Great Renaissance of the Chinese people. For most Chinese people, the Opium War erupted in the 1840s, opened up some miserable pages of the recent Chinese history, or the so-called modern Chinese history, because it's filled with the imperialist invasion of China. First is the Opium War, then followed by the Second Opium War about a decade later, and 30-some years later is an A-nation alliance invasion of China following the Boxer Rebellion. And then a few years later is the Russo-Japanese War at the expense of China, both in territory and in sovereignty. Except for the last one, the war against Japanese invasion in the 30s through the 40s, China had lost almost all of the wars. China suffered a lot of secession of territory and indemnities and so on and so forth. So China has dropped to the status of so-called sub-colony. It's not even a full colony. China is a colony of many countries. That means China and the Chinese people have been suffering humiliation for more than 100 years. Now, after 100 years of humiliation, China and the Chinese people have finally welcomed their great renaissance. The second slogan says, "The East is rising and the West is declining." Its rationale goes like this. The Chinese Communist Party, they launched a revolution, they led the revolution and overthrew the Republic of China and its ruling Kuomintang, the KMT. So China, since then, was on the march toward a better life. That is to say, communism saves China. And under the guidance or under the leadership of communism or the Communist Party, China is striving for industrialization and economic development. After decades of efforts, China's GDP has grown to number 2 of the world, second only to the United States, after it surpassed countries like Italy, France, the UK, Germany, Japan, and finally reached the status of number 2. And China has become the factory of the world and has become the market of the world. That is to say that under the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party, China has grown stronger and stronger. And on the other hand, the West, especially the United States, is declining day after day. That's how the rationale of the East is rising and the West is declining goes. And the third slogan says, the world of the world politics is now facing a big change. It's a change is so big as happens in 100 years. The international politics or world order are dominated by the United States. Now that China has become stronger and stronger, it has the right to demand a change in world order or in international politics. Sometimes this kind of idea are referred to as the Chinese dream or the dream of a great power, the rise of a great power, or the 100-year renaissance. That is to say, they want to challenge or they want to alter the international order. And it's China's turn to take charge. For about a decade, they've been repeatedly promoting slogans like these domestically. Not only they brainwash their own people, they brainwash their own diplomats. That's why we see the so-called wolf warrior diplomacy today. If you think that's just propaganda cliche, then you're wrong, because there are strategic calculations behind all these. First, it involves self-recognition or self-positioning, meaning how they see themselves in this world family or the family of nations, how they position themselves. Once they position themselves, they have to position their relationship with other countries, especially with the major countries or so-called the great powers, the relative relations or the relative positions of each other. Now that they have decided they're strong enough to move up along the ladder of this so-called social ranking in international politics. So they want to challenge the current international order. They want to strive for the position of the great power or so-called hegemony in world politics. They want to disseminate or even want to impose their value systems upon other countries or upon other people. To substantiate our observations, let me provide you with a few solid examples. In October 2020, 1 year after the 2019 crackdown in Hong Kong, the Communist China's ambassador to Canada, he held a press conference, and he openly warned the Canadian government not to offer political asylum to those Hong Kong activists in the democracy movement, and warned, by doing so, the Canadian government will jeopardize the security of the 300,000 Canadian citizens and businessmen in Hong Kong. That's a blunt threat, outright threat. And that's the first example. The second example happened in November 2020. 4 members of the Hong Kong Legislative Council were disqualified. And the foreign ministers of the Five Eye Alliance, they issued an announcement and demanding that Hong Kong withdraw this decision. And the spokesperson of the MOFA, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the People's Republic China, he said, no matter they have 5 eyes or 10 eyes, as long as they dare to jeopardize China's sovereignty, security, or interests of development, be careful, their eyes be poked blind. Again, that's a blunt threat. The third case happened in March 2021. Upon learning that one of the members of the upper chamber of French Congress was leading a group of his colleagues to visit Taiwan, and Communist China's ambassador to France, he wrote a personal letter to this congressman, and asking him to cancel the trip. And because the language used in the letter was kind of harsh and sarcastic, so the French side was not very happy, and they were upset. And they criticized the Chinese ambassador's behavior. Anyway, there were rounds of exchange of verbal attacks. And during the quarrel, one of the French scholars stood up and accused the Chinese side of being undiplomatic, because they intervene in the French democracy or democratic process. And guess what? The Chinese embassy to France, they issued a statement and into it, and calling this professor little rascal, crazy hyena, or ideological monster. How about that? Can you imagine that? That's what the Chinese diplomats were doing at the time. The fourth case has to do with Huawei, the biggest China's mobile phone company. Ms. Ming, its CEO, was detained by the Canadian government. And Communist China's Consul General to Brazil, instead of to Canada, Mr. Li, he issued a short article into it, scolding the Prime Minister or the Premier of Canada, Mr. Trudeau, accusing him of making Canada a lackey of the United States. So Trudeau is a prodigal. Imagine that. That's the kind of language the Chinese diplomat used in public. And the fifth case happened in November 2022. The G20 summit was held in Indonesia. And during the meeting, they held an unofficial conversation. Next day, they met again, and they talked briefly. And since the previous conversation was printed and released by some Canadian newspapers, Xi Jinping was upset about it. And he said to Trudeau, "That's not the proper way to handle our conversation. If you do that, I don't know what to say." Well, it's hard to translate this. In Chinese, it says, 否则就不好说了. It's no equivalent expression in English. But if someone said that to me in Chinese, I will feel threatened, because it does contain a threatening tone in it. And more than that, after Trudeau left, Xi Jinping turned to the camera and said, "Very naive." And that's what the Chinese leader would say in public about the leader of another country. Okay, so much for the background and actual examples of the wolf warrior diplomacy. Now it's about time for us to make some concluding remarks. First thing I want to call attention to is that this wolf warrior diplomacy, although it's motivated by false and radical nationalism, but it's greatly amplified by repeated propaganda and brainwashing efforts on the part of the Chinese Communist Party. And secondly, as we indicated before, it does have a very strong ideological background. And lastly, although this wolf warrior diplomacy is undiplomatic, it's unacceptable, but it does have some kind of strategic calculations behind it. That demonstrates their effort, the Chinese Communist effort to fight for world hegemony, or using their jargon, it manifests their effort to struggle for world hegemony. And I think that's all I want to share with you today. I hope you like it, and I'll see you next time.